Hi, welcome everyone. Good morning. So it's an honor to be here for a second year in a row for a Yom Yun B'Tanach. As most of you know, if you don't, I'm just going to fill you in. We do study a perek a day of Nevi'im and Ketuvim. Started from Yoshua. We currently finished Nevi'im Rishonim, Acharonim. We did Divrei Yamim. We're in the middle of Tehillim now. Everyone is invited to join in whenever you like. Once a week we have a class, and once a month we try to have a scholar or outside Chacham come address us, really puzzling a lot of what we study together. So today, the theme for the most part of the day is focused around the Chorban or Tehillim, sometimes even both. We'll see how we have the speakers address us throughout the day. We have really 9-10 speakers throughout the day on the hour. I'd just really like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for the day. Thank you to Ike Chira, Joey and Sally Shama, Raymond and Camille Sacca, Morris and Vivian Hiddery, Eli and Lillian Haddad, Ronnie Hirsch, Raymond Gindi, Al Gindi, and Joe Waba. So really thank you for helping us put this day together. We really appreciate it, and we hope to really bring more Tanakh to the community. Without any further ado, Rabbi David Fohrman.
Okay, good to be here, and thank you, Jesse, for inviting me out here. Nice to see some new faces. I wonder if anybody who was here in the, I addressed a high school crowd. I don't know if any high schoolers around here, probably not. Okay, anyway, nice to see you again, or for the first time. What I'd like to talk to you about today, you're going to be kind of guinea pigs for me. This is the first time I'm doing this talk as kind of new, and we'll sort of explore it together. But I guess I want to address one basic question with you today. Today is the day in which we begin to mourn the Churban, the destruction of the temple. I want to talk with you about the flip side of that. If the destruction of the temple is the worst of times in Tanakh, what is the best of times? The best of times is the great Messianic visions that you get in prophets like Yeshayahu, where there's a utopian picture. For example, Yeshayahu, Yud Aleph, and Yud Beit, a utopian picture of what life could be like in a perfect Messianic era. And the question I want to address with you today is, if this vision of the best of times, this idea of the coming of the Mashiach, is important in our faith. It's part of the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim. We wait for the Mashiach to come. It's part of contemporary Jewish music. You listen to any song, it's going to mention that we're waiting for Mashiach to come. If it's such a big deal, how come this doesn't appear in Chumash? Right? Why does it take until the Nevi'im, until Yeshayahu, to sketch out a Messianic vision, the idea of the Messiah? If it's so key, so crucial, you'd think it's somewhere in Chamishe Chumshei Torah, and yet it doesn't appear to be. How come? What I want to suggest to you today is that if you look carefully in Chamishe Chumshei Torah, the Messianic idea is there. And what I want to do with you today is to try and explore that notion, to try and ask ourselves, how far back can we go and find the Messianic idea within the Chumash itself? Does it exist within Chumash? What does it look like within Chumash? And if we can understand its roots within Chumash, maybe we can have a better understanding of what this ideal is, why we care for it, why we want it to happen, what it really is, what it is that we're looking at. So this is kind of an exploration back in time as far back as we can go in the Chumash to find this. So let me begin with a thought experiment, if I might. If you were coming up with your own religion that was very similar to Judaism, and you had the Messianic ideal as part of your religion, and you were going to write this Torah, this 5 books of Moses, and you were trying to figure out a good place to put the Messiah, right? You want to talk about the Messiah somewhere, you got 5 books, you got to stick it in somewhere. Where are you going to put it? Where would you put it? Now you basically take the storyline of the Bible as we know it, right? The structure of the Bible as we know it, but the last job of the editing committee up there in heaven, you got to advise God on where to put the Messianic idea, right? And deadline is coming, right? Another couple hours. Got to get this idea in somewhere. So you huddle with your friends, come up with a plan. Where are you going to put this in the book? What do you say?
I have a question. Is there a need for a messianic concept before we have the Torah?
Very interesting question. Is there a need for a messianic concept before what?
Was that the obvious question?
Well, not necessarily, but it's a good question. Is there a need? In other words, you could say that if everything goes well, right, so then there is no need for a messianic idea, in which case you might say then that the messianic idea as it appears in the Torah, right, there's 2 possibilities. One possibility is maybe it's when things go well, right? Maybe it's the vision of what things are supposed to look like when they go well. On the other hand, give me 1 second. On the other hand, the Torah itself seems to forecast the possibility, even the probability, that things are not likely to always go so well, right? You have 2 sections of Chumash, and even more, that are devoted to Tochacha and are devoted to the probability that things are going to go badly, that exile will happen. At the end of Dvarim, we have basically this notion that exile is going to happen. There's going to be a process of tshuva, people will come back, but things will not always go so well. So there might even be a need within the Chumash for that sort of messianic idea. So that's, okay, interesting, yeah.
Probably in Moshe's recounting in Dvarim, the only mention that I know of in Torah that even refers to it is negative when it says,
Right.
That's the only mention of Aharit Dayamin in the Torah.
Well, you actually have one other one, but actually you have 2 of them, 2 other ones. But before we get there, I'm not asking what's in the... Yes, that's correct. So leaving those aside for a moment, I'm really just asking you, again, it's a thought experiment. If you were writing the Torah, where would you logically put this? Yeah? Okay. We have a gender war here. So we have the women's side over here. Well, I don't know if all you women agree, but but the possibility of putting it in the beginning, and then there's the possibility of putting it at the end. And both kind of sort of have their logic, right? Which might be, give me 1 second. The logic for the beginning would be?
It's the premise of everything that I'm about to say.
Premise of everything that's about to unfold. The logic for the end is?
I wasn't going to let people know that things get so bad that things have to get good again. Let people know that things can be good. And then there's going to be a dead point, but we can get good again.
So in other words, we should at least end on a high note. End on a high note. Okay, so we have a nomination for the beginning. We have a nomination for the end.
Say in the middle.
And then we have a nomination for the middle.
When the Jews were slaves in Egypt,
Yep.
they could tack on to that the Messianic message could have helped them to get through their suffering. I think that was the most suffering that the Jews experienced was in Mitzrayim. And they had that to hold on to and gave them strength to overcome the terror.
Okay, so maybe around there, yeah.
I wouldn't put it necessarily beginning or end, but I put it as part of the day, meaning it shouldn't be featured in the covenant.
Okay.
You see the covenant up here, like we read today, also, even with Moshe, right, the Torah, I don't know how it's like Yaakovs, and you see that that's a recurring theme in good times and bad, recalling of, Hashem's speech with
Okay? All right, so,
So Rabbi,
yeah,
can I ask a question?
yeah.
Is it presumed that everything that the Torah predicts about things not always going right, that prediction ceases to be valid when the Messianic era arrives? So that it's a temporary
Well, yeah, I mean,
mistakes and errors. When the Messianic time arrives, bad judgments don't happen.
That's mixing up a couple different things, but let's just keep it simple and just say the Tochacha itself suggests, the Tocha and Dvarim suggests that as bad as it is, it's temporary, and as bad as things get, God will eventually come and not forsake us entirely and bring us home. So the bad isn't bad forever. Yeah?
I just have a question. When you're talking about Messianic times, do you mean a savior in terms of a man coming and saving, like you're talking about Moshe, or you're talking about the people returning and doing and having to do in society?
So I'm mostly talking about the latter, right? Which is like, to the extent that it might be a person coming and saving, right? The person is just the vehicle for the utopia, for creating some sort of utopia. So really the question is, what is the Torah's utopian vision? Okay, I'd like to suggest to you that there are sort of three ideas that are coming out from you guys, right? Some of you are suggesting that this should be at the end. Some of you are suggesting it should be at the beginning. And some of you are suggesting it should be then in the middle, right? Kind of around having to do with the Brit, maybe Sinai, maybe the Exodus from Egypt, something to do with that. I'd like to suggest that all three of those are true, okay? And that in all three of those places, you will actually find visions of the Messianic ideal, sometimes actually connected with the idea of Acharit HaYamim themselves. The words Acharit HaYamim appear in the Torah with reference to Yaakov when he gathers together his children to tell them what will be in the end of days. Also appears in Bilam, when Bilam says that he has a prophecy about what things will be in the end of days. And Bilam isn't something which sort of came up here, but maybe that's part of the picture too. I'm trying to think of the best and most logical way to do this here. But I guess I'm going to start with, let's start with one Acharit HaYamim vision, very quickly, which is Yaakov's blessing to his children in Parshat Vayechi. What happens immediately after that? Yaakov blesses his children, tells them what's going to be at the end of days with them, gives them, each of them, these mysterious blessings. Interestingly, there will be one other time in Chumash where these blessings will be echoed, right? There'll be another time where there will be an old man who will be standing around and giving blessings to each of the tribes, and that, of course, is where? In V'zot HaBracha. So for those of you who vote at the end, right, maybe you try to see something in V'zot HaBracha, but the prologue to V'zot HaBracha is going to be in the end of Vayechi, when Yaakov is telling the Shvatim what things will be like them for the end of days. Now, immediately after that, what happens right after that? What happens right after that is Yaakov dies. Then you have an interesting story, seemingly a trivial story, the story of Yaakov's burial. Right? What happens in this story? So in this story, there's a problem. The problem basically is that Yaakov wants to be buried in the land of Israel. The reason why that's a problem is because Yaakov has spent the last 17 years of his life in Egypt as the king father, as the father of Yosef. And Yosef, as you know, right, was lauded by the Egyptians. He was their savior. He is the one who made everything good for them. And Yaakov seems to have been treated kind of like a king himself. The populace really got into Yaakov to such an extent that, as you'll see, when Yaakov dies, the people in Mitzrayim mourn him for 70 days. 70 days is a long time, right? That's longer than the people mourn the deaths of Aaron, Moshe, and Miriam, right? This is really heavy. They embalm him the way that an Egyptian mummy would be embalmed. He's really treated as royalty by the Egyptians. So the problem is, if you are a state figure, so there's going to be a royal burial for you. But where does Yaakov want that burial to be? He wants it to be in that little Mesopotamian backwater, right? Third world country, Canaan. Remember, there's been this famine. Egypt has managed to save the world. Everyone's coming from everywhere. Canaan doesn't really rate, right? Imagine, what is CNN going to say when the royal burial is held in Canaan, right? It doesn't look good for the PR. And what happens is that Yaakov insists to his son that he gets buried there. And you'll see in the beginning of Vayechi that he actually makes Yosef swear to this. After Yosef says, I'll do it, he doesn't say thank you. Instead of saying thank you, he says, swear to me. Why just say that? That's not a nice thing to say. Your kid said he'd do it. Why are you saying swear to me? He says that because Yaakov knows how difficult this is, right? Because Paro is not going to go along with this. This places Yosef at a very difficult position in his relationship with Paro. How is he going to manage to make this request happen? And as you see, Yosef procrastinates. He doesn't tell Paro about this. Yaakov dies, and Yosef still procrastinates. And the Mitzrayim mourn him, and Yosef still doesn't say anything. And they embalm him. And if you think about embalming, when you take a body and you embalm it and mummify it, what's the whole point of mummifying a body? To preserve the body. Well, what do Jews do with bodies? We put them in the ground. What's the point of putting a body in the ground? Let it rot, let it decompose. They're actually opposite ideas. So here comes Yosef, and he's about to tell Paro, look, just want to let you know, we do things a little differently. It's like, maybe you could have told me this 70 days ago before we started embalming him, right? It's a very difficult kind of position. But Yosef finally does it, and he makes the request. And in that request, Perak Nun Pasuk Chet, he says, Avi hishbiyani le'mor hinei anochi meit bekivri asher kariti li beretz Canaan. My father made me swear that I was going to take him to Canaan. And because he made me swear, please let me do this. Ata ela na ve'ekbrat avi v'ashuva. I'll come back, I promise you, but I need to bury him. Paro says, Alehu kvorat avicha kasher hishbiyacha. Go and bury your father as you have promised him. And that language, as you have promised him, seems to suggest that the reason I'm saying you can go is because you promised, but otherwise we wouldn't be having this discussion. And if you think about Paro now, he doesn't seem to be so happy about it. He maybe says yes through gritted teeth, but he has the permission he needs, Yosef. But if you look at the next psukim, you find something amazing. Vayal Yosef ligborat aviv vayalu ito kol avdei Paro ziknei beito v'chol ziknei eretz Mitzrayim. In this burial, who goes in this burial procession? It's not just the 70 Jews who happen to be in Mitzrayim right now. All of Paro's noblemen, all of his servants, they go along on this burial procession outside of Egypt to this little backwater in Canaan to bury this man, Yaakov. V'chol beit Yosef ve'echa beit aviv. And everyone goes, Rak tapam v'tzonam karamazu beretz Goshen. The only thing they did is they left behind their young, and they left behind their cattle in Eretz Goshen. Vayal imo gam rechev gam parashim. Vayia machaneh kaved ma'od. Pharaoh sends along chariots and horsemen, and it's a very great encampment, everyone together. Vayavo ad goran ha'atad, asher be'ever ha'yarden. And they get to this place called Goran ha'atad, which is in across the Jordan River. I'll talk about that in a moment. And there, Vayispedu Sham, there they make eulogies for Yaakov. Misped Gadol v'Kaved Ma'od, a great eulogy. And at that eulogy, Vayar Yoshev Haaretz HaKnani et Evel Begaran Ha'atav, the Canaanites, the onlookers, the Canaanites of the local area, they see this mourning, Vayomru Evel Kaved Zel Mitzrayim. And they said, what a great mourning there is for Egypt here. What's interesting about this is that the Canaanites don't even understand that it's a Jewish burial because most of the people there are Egyptians, right? So they're talking about what a great burial procession this is for Egypt and how remarkable it is that it's not actually in Egypt. Now let me ask you one or two questions about this scene. Question number one. What in the world were they doing in Garan HaAtad? Where is Garan HaAtad? The Torah tells you, we don't know much, but we know that it's an Ever HaYarden. Little geography lesson here. Where is Ever HaYarden? Ever HaYarden is on the east side of the Jordan River, okay? That's where modern day Jordan is now. So somewhere near, right, not quite Amman, right, but in, right, the other side of the Jordan. You go to Yericho, you look on the other side of the Jordan, somewhere over there, right? That's Garan HaAtad. Where did this burial procession start from? Egypt. Okay, little geography lesson. Where is Egypt? Egypt is southwest. Now remember, you're not flying on an airplane, you're walking. Okay? So, you have to walk from Cairo to Hebron, right? Give me the shortest route, right? Shortest route from the southwest coming to Hebron, you're just going to kind of come up, just sort of bear northeast, and you're just going to sort of keep on walking. You'll cross Gaza, right? And then you'll cross, around Modi'in, you'll walk around Highway 1, you go up the mountains, and then you get in towards Hebron, right? Where you're going to bury in Marat HaMachpelah. What are you doing in Jordan? Do you understand? Jordan, to get to Jordan, you have to go around the south, underneath, through the Negev desert, basically, and then all the way you got to cross, go around the Dead Sea, go up around, and then come around this side. It's like crazy out of the way, right? So that's question number one. Question number two. The Torah goes out of its way to tell us that for the burial procession, Rak tapam v'tzonamu b'karam azu beretz Goshen, that the Jews left behind their children and their cattle in the land of Goshen. Let me ask you a question. What if the Torah hadn't told you that fact? Would you be really bothered? Right? So that's kind of interesting. But is that the possibility, right? Is it strange that the Torah would go out of its way to tell you the babysitting arrangements for the funeral, right? In other words, that don't worry, they were able to leave their children behind, they were able to leave their cattle behind, unless there was this issue of maybe going back or something like that. But it's like a strange sort of thing. Maybe, although in fact they did come back within 7 days, wasn't really that long of a trip. It seems a little strange. Then, and now let me play this little game with you. Paro sends Rechav and Parashim, horsemen and chariots, to accompany this procession. Is there another time of the Torah where Paro sends horsemen and chariots as Jews leave Egypt? Well, there sure is, right? Happens a good, 400 years later. That, of course, is when they're going to Yam Suf. Now, interestingly, in the Exodus from Egypt that we know of, how far do the chariots and horsemen get? They only get as far as the water, and once they get as far as the water, they're gone, and the Jews continue to go. Over here in this story, how far did the chariots and horsemen get? If you look carefully, you find that the chariots and horsemen also only get as far as the water. But this time the water is the Jordan River. They stay at the Jordan River, and the Jews cross to bury their father. So one more time, Egyptian chariots and horsemen accompany Jews and get as far as the water. When else is there an issue with Rakta Pamvatsonam of children and cattle, whether they'll come or whether they'll go? That's an issue later on in Yetziat Mitzrayim as well, right? When else do you have Canaanites who are observing what's happening at the water with Egyptians and Jews and remarking about how astonishing it is? That is an Az Yashir, right? When you have Mogu Kol Yoshvei Canaan, when the people of Canaan will hear, you sort of have this echo of it over here. And by the way, when else do the Jews take this crazy circuitous route through the desert, right? Not going the short way and coming up through Ever HaYarden, such that they have to cross the Jordan River to come into Israel? That's also Yetziat Mitzrayim. To see what's happening here, everything that's happening with the burial of Paro, with the burial of Yaakov, seems to happen again 400 years later. Except the second time around, it happens differently. What's the meaning of these connections? It seems that somehow the Torah seems to be suggesting that a template for Yetziat Mitzrayim, a blueprint for Yetziat Mitzrayim, existed with Yaakov's burial. That somehow everything that eventually happened with Yetziat Mitzrayim would happen with the burial of Yaakov. Except, I want to suggest, that the burial of Yaakov was a more ideal expression of it than Yetziat Mitzrayim. And to show you that, let me ask you this question. What is the fundamental connection between these two stories? Why should these stories be similar? There's a deeper connection to them beyond the fact that in both cases Jews leave Egypt, and in both cases Jews are accompanied by Egyptians. I think there's a deeper connection between these two episodes of Yaakov's burial and Yetziat Mitzrayim. What was the purpose of Yaakov's burial? What was the purpose of that procession? What were they doing? Any burial procession, on the one hand, you're burying your father, but on the other hand, you're giving kavod, you're giving honor to your father. The whole point of the Rechev and the Parashim was to be an honor guard for this person who the Egyptians themselves considered their royalty, Yaakov Avinu. What was the purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim as Moshe first expressed it to Paro? As Moshe first expressed it to Paro, it wasn't actually about leaving forever. What was it about? 3 days. And what were we going to do during those 3 days? Nizbecha l'Hashem Elokeinu. We're going to honor our Father in heaven. Both stories are about giving honor to your father. The only difference is it your earthly father that you're giving honor to, or is it your heavenly father? Well, the first time around, there was an earthly father. And the remarkable thing about it was that even though this earthly father was really the father of the Jews, the Egyptians saw him as their adopted father too. We too need to give kavod to this father. He's Egyptian as well as yours. He's the father of us all. But Jews will take your lead, right? He's your biological father. If you want to bury him instead of embalm him, we'll do that. We'll send Rechav Parashim. It doesn't look good on CNN. We don't care. The Knaani is going to look at it and say, Evel Kaved Zel Mitzrayim is going to be very embarrassing. There's going to be a state funeral outside Egyptian borders. We don't care. It's our father too. That could have happened in Yetziat Mitzrayim too. One of the tantalizing questions of history, one of the what-if questions of history, is, to some extent, I talk about this in a book I wrote on the Exodus, to some extent, the Exodus story was about demonstrating the fact that there is one God in the world who controls all aspects of nature. that demonstration wasn't just something that we as Jews could understand. It was something which anyone looking at the story of the Exodus can understand. And hopefully, in a perfect world, the way the Exodus would have worked out is that at some point, Egypt and Paro would have come to understand that too. And the question is, what if that had happened? What would Yetziat Mitzrayim would have looked like? Think about a utopian picture. What if Paro at some point had figured it out? If Egypt at some point had figured it out, had said, yes, there's a creator in heaven. And that creator in heaven, even though he has this special relationship with these Hebrews, but he's the creator, which means he's the father of us all. If Paro had ever figured that out, then Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exodus from Egypt, would have looked exactly like the burial of Yaakov. It wouldn't have been enough for Paro to just let the slaves go. He would have said, look, you're on a mission to go honor your father. You're on a mission to go sacrifice your father in the desert. You shouldn't be slaves. You should be free. You should go back to Canaan. We're going to accompany you. And the Rechav and the Parashim would come again. It's almost as if, in the end, what happens is just a shadow of the Exodus that might have been. In the end, the Rechav and Parashim are there, but Paro is not on the same page as the Jews. And the purpose of the chariots and horsemen of Paro is to chase after the Jews and kill them, rather than to give honor to a shared father. But maybe that's only Paro's perspective. What about God's perspective? Remember, as they left, they could have left and everything would have been fine. God is mechazek the heart of Paro. God hardens Paro's heart and says, the reason I'm hardening Paro's heart is because ikavda b'Paro b'chol chelo. I want to be honored, right, with Paro and all of his chariots and all of his horsemen. It almost sounds like God is saying, where's my honor guard? You know, the last time around, Egypt sent an honor guard. Where's the honor guard this time? From God's perspective, it's a parade, right? The chariots and horsemen have to come again. And then they have a choice. You know, are they gonna be there to celebrate, or are they gonna be there to murder you? If they're gonna be there to murder you, I have to protect you. But ikavda b'Paro b'chol chelo, they're here to celebrate. In the end, the reason, at least from Paro's perspective, why those chariots and horsemen are there to kill the Jews rather than celebrate with them. But what I want to suggest to you is, looking back on this whole picture, maybe we begin in the very first mention of Acharit HaYamim in the Torah, which is Yaakov's blessings to his children, and then his death, and then his burial. Maybe we get a picture, a little glimpse of a messianic vision. And maybe that messianic vision is the exodus that could have been at the sea, where you have a nation, right? What would it be like if you could have Israel doing what it's supposed to do, heading out on a journey to honor Father, come to Israel, build a temple, and you have a belligerent nation, a nation that was a bitter enemy of Israel? What if that nation could be turned? What if that nation could see that it shares a father along with Israel and could celebrate with them? That would be a special thing. The vision of the Beit HaMikdash that you have in the Nevi'im Achronim is a Beit Tfilah Yikarei L'chol Ha'amim. It's a place for all nations, right? What if all nations could somehow celebrate together? Would that have been a missed messianic opportunity there at the sea? Okay. Hold that vision for a moment. And now let's go to the things you said. If you would have to pick a place in the Torah for the Messiah to appear. Be at the end of the book, the beginning of the book, or maybe the middle of the book. This is the middle of the book. This is the sea crossing. What I'm suggesting to you is maybe the sea crossing is a paradigm for a Messianic moment, the way the sea crossing should have been. But now let's go to the end of the book. The end of the book, as I mentioned to you, is Parshat V'zot HaBracha. V'zot HaBracha is kind of like an echo of that moment when Yaakov was blessing all of his children. Later on, Moshe is going to bless all of the tribes. Open up with me toward the end of V'zot HaBracha, and I want to show you something. I think you have it here. I want to suggest to you that the Messianic moment is indeed at the end of the Torah. It's the last words Moshe says. What are the last words Moshe says? V'zot HaBracha is divided up into 3 sections: a prologue, the body, and the epilogue. The body of V'zot HaBracha are the blessings to each of the tribes. But before you get to the blessings to each of the tribes, there's a little prologue and there's a little epilogue. I want to read the prologue and the epilogue together with you, because I think when you take the prologue and epilogue together, these last things Moshe says, that is the Messianic vision. Read the beginning of V'zot HaBracha with me. Perek Lamed Gimel. V'zot HaBracha sheberach Moshe ish Elokim et bnei Yisrael lifnei moto. This is the blessing that Moshe gives. Vayomer. Hashem mi Sinai ba. God is coming from Sinai, as if there's another version of the giving of the Torah at Sinai. Except this time, v'zarach mi seir lamo. As God is coming from Sinai, he's shining forth from another mountain, from Seir. Who lives in Seir? Esav. Strange. Hofia mehar paran. He's coming from another mountain too, from Har Paran. There's somehow this Sinai experience is not just us. It's other nations too. There's other mountains that God is appearing over. Vasam Rivavot Kodesh. He's coming with his angels, with thousands of angels coming on high from heaven. Mimino, in his right hand, so to speak, Eish Dat Lamo, is the law, is the fiery law that he has to give. It's this vision of another Sinai experience, but somehow with other people involved too. Look at the next words. Af chovev amim. Even he is a lover of all nations, right? The other nations, God loves them. Kol kadoshav biadecha. He has all of his holy ones in his hands. In this case, it's unclear if holy ones is, if it's all the nations, or perhaps it's us, Israel. V'heim tukul raglecha, and they are gathered around his feet. Yisam midabrotecha, this holy ones, probably Israel. Yisam midabrotecha, the ones holding up his laws, the 10 Commandments. Torah tziva lanu Moshe. After all, God gave us the Torah. Morasha kilat Yaakov, it's our inheritance. You have this vision, this other Sinai experience, except we're not the only ones there, right? There's other nations seated around in the mezzanine seats, seated around in the nosebleed seats, right? I mean, it's everybody somehow all together, and God is a lover of all nations. And then finally, Vayihi Bishurun Melech. There will come a time when in Israel, in Yeshurun, there will be a king. Bit Asef Roshei Am. That king will be crowned, as it were, in an asifa, in a gathering of the heads of all nations, Yachad Shiftei Yisrael, together with the tribes of Israel. I wonder if that king that we're talking about is the Messianic king. It's a vision of the King Mashiach. What does it look like? It's somehow this universal vision. That's the prologue. The prologue ends with this vision, Vayihi Bishurun Melech. But now look at the epilogue. The epilogue, you seem to get a very, very different picture. The epilogue you'll find begins with Pasuk Chaf Vav in Perek Lamed Gimel. Ein Ka'el Yeshurun. So Yeshurun was the last vision that we got in the prologue. It's now the first vision that you get in the epilogue. Ein Ka'el Yeshurun. There is no one like God, O Israel. Rochev Shamayim Be'ezrecha, who rides the heavens to aid you, to help you. Ubegavato Shechakim, and his pride is on the clouds, right? God is the heavenly Savior. Mono Elohei Kedem u'mitachat zrot alam. He dwells not just in the heavens, but underneath the foundations of the earth. V'garesh mipanecha oyev vayomer hashmeid. And he can expel the enemy and declare destruction in defense of Israel. And therefore, vayishkon Yisrael betach, Israel will dwell secure, badad, alone. Ein Yaakov el eretz dagan v'tirosh. Israel will dwell secure, led into a land of plenty. Eretz dagan v'tirosh. In other words, why will Israel dwell secure? There's really two elements of security. One element of security is military security. Military security is provided by God. God is taking care of you. God is destroying enemies. But there's also economic security. Economic security is provided to you by the fact that your land is going to be able to provide bounty. Eretz dagan v'tirosh. It's a land of grain, a land of oil. Af shamav ya'arfutal. Even the heavens drip dew. By the way, this language of dagan v'tirosh, af shamav ya'arfutal, sort of evokes an earlier moment in the Torah also. Anyone know where? The bracha of that Yaakov receives from his father, right? Which is Yitin Lacha Elokim Mitala Shamayim Umishmanei Haaretz Rov Dagan V'Tirosh. So the idea is here that seems to be coming to fruition. Ashrecha Yisrael Mi Kamocha, who is like you, O Israel? Am Noshab Hashem, a nation saved by God. Magen Ezrecha, the shield of your help. Asher Cherav Gavatecha, you can take pride in his sword. V'ikachashu Oivecha Lach, the other nations may argue against you, may debate against you, may propagandize against you, v'ata, but you won't even answer them. Atal b'motemo tidroch, you will trample over their high places, you'll be victorious over them. So this vision is very different than the first vision, right? So here too, you have a vision of Israel with relationship to nations, but it's a very different vision of Israel with relationship to nations, right? The first time around, it is, right, the beginning, the prologue is everybody's buddy-buddy. It's the Brady Bunch, right? Everybody put their arms around each other. It's all great. And in the second vision, it's a very scary vision. It's a vision of war, and it's a vision of God coming to defend and destroying the enemy. So now the question is, which is the real vision, right? How do you understand the contradiction, so to speak, between the prologue and the epilogue? It's possible. It doesn't seem to be the simplest interpretation of it, but it could be. Yeah, go ahead. Right. So that's as saying that you're talking the Gemara at the beginning of Avodah Zarah. Right? Yeah, that's possible. The notion that in the beginning that the people were offered the chance to accept the Torah and rejected it. But still, I think the simplest understanding is that there is a Messianic vision in which case they somehow have part of this. What I think is, and by the way, one other little piece I want to point out to you. This language of Vishkon Yisrael Betach, Badad, right? Israel will dwell securely. Let me look at that language with you. Yishkon Yisrael Betach Badad en Yaakov. What does that remind you of? Where else do you have a vision of it? Okay, that's true. Somewhere else also. Where else do you have a vision of Israel dwelling or sitting Badad? That's actually a sad vision, the complete opposite of this vision. It's the beginning of Echa. Echa yashva vadad ha'ir rabati am. Right? Here's this nation, she's dwelling alone. It almost seems like the vision, the Messianic vision of the best of times, is just a flip of the Messianic vision of the worst of times. You can be dwelling alone and it can be good, and you can be dwelling alone and it can be bad. You can be dwelling all alone and destroyed, or you can be dwelling all alone and secure. To be dwelling all alone and secure means that you have no need for foreign alliances, you're independent. You don't have to come on to others. Yishkon Yisrael betach badad ein Yaakov el eretz dagam v'tirosh. You have that security. Seemingly, what you have, if you put the prologue and epilogue together, is that in the Messianic era, or in the end of days, when Israel is doing what it's supposed to be doing, when it is dwelling securely in a relationship with God in Israel, seemingly the nations of the world have a choice. And the choice is, how will you choose to relate to this people? Some nations will just choose and say, hey, this is great. Look at what these guys are doing. That's a model. Can I be part of this? And they sit in the mezzanine seats, right? They're part of this vision. And that seems to be the prologue. But every nation has a choice. And other nations will say, no, this isn't for me. And they will disparage, they will propagandize you against, so they will argue against you. And that's v'yikachashu v'chalach, the enemies that will dispute you. And in the Messianic vision, God says, look, I'll take care of you. I won't allow you to be destroyed by those enemies. But now if you take that idea, nations that have a choice, that can either choose to be with you or can choose to be against you, this vision that you have at the very end of the Torah, where else do you have that vision? How early back in the Torah does that vision go? It goes right to the beginning. And there's the beginning. The very beginning of our nation is Avram. The very first things that God says to Avram is this vision in just one sentence. What is that vision? That vision is, right, if you go back to the very beginning, first words of Lech Lecha, let's just kind of read it together. Escha Lagoy Gadol Vavarechacha Perak Yudbet and Breshit, page 54 in the Stone Chumash. I will make you great, Agad Lashmecha V'yeh Bracha, and then Va'avarcha Mevarchecha Umekalelcha Aor. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. V'nivrechu ba kol mishpachot adama. And through you, blessing will come to the world. Now, let me ask you a question. Are those two different ideas, or are those one idea? We usually see them as two different ideas. Let me explain what I mean. Idea number one is, I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you. And idea number two is, through you, blessing will come to the world. But here's an interesting possibility. What if they're the same idea? What then? Here's how they could be the same idea. When God says, that through you blessing will come to the world, how will that happen? How will it be that blessing will come to the world through Israel? Is that just magic? Is that God's going to sprinkle his fairy dust and say, oh, Israel's in the world, so now you're going to be blessed, and some fairy dust for you, and you'll be blessed, and everyone will be blessed, we'll all be happy? Or is there a mechanism, a logical, rational mechanism, through which blessing could actually come to the world through Israel? Maybe there's a mechanism. And maybe the mechanism is the verse right before this, which is, Avarcha mevarchecha umekalelcha aor. Now this is a tricky verse. if you look at this verse and you say, is Israel powerful in this verse or not powerful? It's a very tricky question to answer, because the verse does not say that Israel will have the power to bless nations or the power to curse nations. It is not that those who Israel blesses are blessed and those who Israel curses are cursed. By the way, we just read something yesterday where someone supposedly had the power to those who you bless are blessed and those who you cursed are cursed. Who's that? That's Bilam. But that's a corruption of our blessing, because that's not the way it actually works for us. It doesn't say those who we bless are blessed. We have no power to bless. We have no power to curse. Our power is a passive power. The power is those who bless us will be blessed. Those who curse us will be cursed. How? You know how that works? Because we're like a mirror. The Ashkenazim have their Hasidic stories. I don't know if you guys know the Hasidic stories, right? But my parents were close to Shlomo Carlebach. He always used to tell the story about this guy who's supposedly one of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim. But the strange thing about him is that whenever you looked at him, you saw a mirror of yourself. That seems to be this blessing. When the nations look at us, they see a mirror of themselves. If they bless us, blessing comes to them. If they curse us, curse comes to them. Why? Because when Israel's doing what it's supposed to be, when we actually develop a model society, if we succeed in developing a model society, that we have economic security, right? We have social justice. We've got a relationship with God going. We have a nation that is working, and then nations look upon this and say, hey, here's a nation in relationship with God. They have a choice. They can choose to look at us as a model and say, we'd like to be part of this. If so, they're in effect blessing you. Well, then blessing comes to them because they've made a choice to accept a role model which is helpful for them. If they curse you, then they're going to be cursed because they're not taking advantage of a role model. They're disparaging the very role model that they can use to help them. That's how v'nivruchu b'cha kol mishpot adama v'zarecha. That's how blessing comes to the world. In V'zot HaBracha, we seem to have a vision of that. A vision of that actually taking place. But now, and I just have a few minutes left with you, very few minutes probably, precious few minutes, right? So as I mentioned, one of the downsides of doing a talk that you've never done before, you don't know exactly how long it takes. So there's another half an hour here, which I'm not going to be able to get to. But let me at least take you to one other episode, which was the main thing I want to talk to you about, which is, can we trace this Messianic idea to one other place in the Torah? Well, these words from Eicha, a nation dwelling alone, that we now hear in V'zot HaBracha, V'yishkon Yisrael betach badad ein Yaakov. Those words, Yishkon Yisrael betach, they too come from an earlier place in the Torah. Moshe is standing on top of a mountain, looking down at Israel, talking about them dwelling securely in relationship with God. But before Moshe, there was another man who stood on top of a mountain, looking down at Israel, dwelling securely, and said those exact same words. And who was that? That was Bilam. What is B'yishkon Yisrael betach badad in Bilam's language? Right? Matovu alach Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael. Right? And Hein am levadad yishkon ubagoyim lo yitchashav. Hein am levadad. There's that word. Badad yishkon. V'yishkon Yisrael betach badad. It turns out that Moshe didn't make up his words. He was actually quoting a Gentile prophet. There's a fascinating chazal, right? The sages say in the Medrash that when it says at the end of the Torah in V'zot HaBracha, V'lo kam navi od k'Moshe, that there was never another nation, Navi in Israel like Moshe, they say, Lo kam navi b'Yisrael od k'Moshe. But there was a Navi in Umot HaOlam who was like Moshe too, and it was Bilam. And you say to yourself, that's strange. Why would you say that Bilam is as good as Moshe? But here's the evidence. The evidence is that even Moshe, at the very end of his life, in his Messianic vision, was quoting someone else, a Gentile prophet, who stood on top of a mountain, blessing Israel. If you think about that Gentile prophet, where was he standing? Where was he standing? Take a look at the last words of Parshat Chukat. The last words of Parshat Chukat establish the setting for where Bilam was. Yes, that's true. He's on top of a mountain. He was Rosh HaPiska, Mishkaf al Pnei Yishimon, right? So there was another man who was Rosh HaPiska, right? Alei Rosh HaPiska. That was Moshe. But look at this. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael vayachanu ba'arvot Moav me'ever liyarden Yericho. The last words of Parshat Chukat. The final encampment. Arvot Moav, across the Jordan River. That's interesting. Because, turn now where is it? If you look at where the final speech of Moshe was given, in V'zot HaBracha, it's the same place. It's Arvot Moav al Yarden Yerecho. Bilam and Moshe are actually at the same place. It's the same mountain range that they're standing and blessing Israel. Let me leave you with this final image. If you look at last week's parsha, before Balak, Chukat, right, you get an interesting picture. Here's Israel. They've come to Arvot Moav, Al Yarden Yerecho. They're about to cross the Jordan River. What's going to happen when they cross the Jordan River? What's going to happen? It's going to split. There was a water crossing once before with a split water, right? That was back in Yam Suf. So let's talk about 40 years ago, you had Yam Suf. 40 years later, you have the Yarden about to split. Look at the events that happen in Parshat Chukat. Aaron dies. Right after Aaron dies, you have a war against the Knani Melech Arad. Let me see if I can show it to you. Vayishma Knani Melech Arad, Yoshev Negev, Ki ba Yisrael derech hatarim. Chazal say that Knani was actually Amalek dressed up. In the 40th year, the Jews confront Amalek, and then they cross the Jordan River. 40 years ago, though, also, right after crossing the Sea of Reeds, the Jews confronted Amalek. Look at the next thing that happens in Parshat Chukat. The next thing that happens in Parshat Chukat is the people complain about the man. And they are stuck, and they complain about the man, and they have the Nachashim Asrafim, and then they say Chatanu, right? They apologize, and things get better. Well, so here we are at the 40th year. They fight Amalek, they complain against the man, and then they cross the river. But 40 years before that, they had fought Amalek, but before they fought Amalek, they had complained about the man. And before they complained about the man, they had crossed the Red Sea. See what's happening? Cross the Red Sea, complain about the man, fight Amalek. Then 40 years pass, fight Amalek, complain about the man, and cross the Jordan River. Look at the next event that happens. in Parshat Chukot. Next thing that happens is they get to this well, this amazing well in the desert that God provided for them. That's interesting. So here they fight Amalek, then they complain about the mun, then they get to this well that God provided them in the desert, and then they cross the Jordan. And over here, they fight Amalek, but before that, they complain against the mun, and before that, they came to Elim, where there were these wells that God just provided for them. And right before that, they crossed the Red Sea. Look at the next event that happens. When they find the well in Parshat Chukot, what do? Oh, isn't that interesting? Az Yashir Yisrael at Hashira Hazot. We've heard those words before. So, over here, they fight Amalek, they complain against the mun, they get this water, and then they sing Az Yashir Yisrael, and right at the exact place where that should happen on the other side, the people sing Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael. Now, all of this is leading, right, to this moment. What's the next moment? The next thing that happens is, it sounds like in the 40th year, we're going like backwards through history, and we're getting closer and closer to what moment? To this water crossing moment, right? In other words, right after Az Yashir, if you're going backwards, so the next moment backwards would be the actual water crossing moment. So what happens? So in the actual water crossing story that we were talking about earlier, there was a belligerent nation, Egypt, that waged war against us, right? It was miraculously defeated, but there was a hope that they could actually celebrate with us instead, but that hope didn't actually happen. Well, it sounds like here's another chance. So what happens? The very next thing that happens is you have belligerent nations show up on the scene. Remember, V'zot HaBracha, there's two kinds of nations. Nations can choose to join you. Nations can choose to oppose you. So what do you meet next? We go to nations, Sichon and Og, we say, hi, we have no problem with you guys, we love you guys, just want to pass through your land, can we please pass through your land, please? Sichon says, no, comes out, belligerent agent, opposes us. What happens? He's a very strong guy, we completely wipe him out. Same thing happens with Og, like to pass through your land. Og says, no, we completely wipe out Og, right? What's the very next story? Now we have belligerent nations destroyed. Well, the other part of the Messianic vision, one part of the Messianic vision for Zos HaBracha is belligerent nations destroyed. But the other part is allied nations sing with you. Allied nations rejoice with you. That's part of the vision. That's the next thing that could happen as you're at the sea crossing moment. Turn the page on Parshat Chukot, after the destruction of Sichon, after the destruction of Og. Now you're in Arvad Moab, Ever Yarden Yerecho, the place that V'zot HaBracha is actually going to be said. Vayar Balak ben Tzipor. Yesterday, right? And then Balak comes and sees Asher Asa Yisrael Amori, sees what happened to these belligerent nations. Now it's interesting. He's worried. Vayagar Moab, mipnei ha'am, ma'od, ki ravhu. He's worried because they are many. Ki ravhu, anyone? When do you have ki ravhu? Mitzrayim was worried about us. Ki ravhu, right? Vayakatz Moab mipnei b'nei Yisrael. What does that remind you of? Vayakatz Moab mipnei b'nei Yisrael? Vayakutzu mipnei b'nei Yisrael. This is all the same language of how Egypt feared us. Why? You're right at that moment where Moab is the new Egypt. And the question is, which Paro are they going to choose to be? The first Paro that sent Rechav and Parashim as an honor guard? The first Paro that was willing to sing with the Jews? Or the second Paro that would destroy them? He makes a choice to be the second Paro. He fears just like Egypt. And he comes along and says, Ata lechana ara liat amazek ki atzum hu mimeni. Atzum hu mimeni? Right? Egypt. Rav atzum mimeni. It's all Egypt one more time. But he comes to this man called Bilam and says, Bilam, I know something about you. Whoever you bless is blessed. Whoever you curse is cursed. That's the mixed up version of the blessing. He's the mixed up version of Egypt, and he gets a mixed up version of the blessing. He can't see anything right, this guy, right? So here he comes and asserts that Bilam has a power he doesn't have. And Bilam says, look, I'm just going to do whatever God says. We'll go. Along comes Bilam, and Bilam sees something. He sees Yisrael, shochen lishvatav. He sees them dwelling, secure, with this nation that's trying to curse them, that's trying to harm them. And you have to ask yourself, Balak is a smart guy. If Balak is so scared of us, and Balak saw what we did against far superior nations, Og and Sichon, and he saw that. So let me ask you, why didn't Balak try to militarily oppose us? Isn't it strange that the very first thing he would do is try to curse us, to get God to curse us? What, if he knows we're an enemy, why doesn't he militarily oppose us? What's the answer? He knows he'll fail. He saw what happened to Sichon. He saw what happened to Og. That's Vayar Balak. He saw what happened to them. So if he sees that the only reason we're successful is because God is on our side, if the only reason we're successful is because God miraculously helped defeat these nations, if you're Balak, what should you do? This is the time to join them, to say, hey, we can celebrate with you, right? The Jews have no beef with Moab, but instead he retreats into fear, and the Messianic moment fails. But there's one glimmer of it, because instead of an entire Gentile nation, Moab, there's one Gentile person who goes to the top of that mountain and sees the Jews. Vayar Yisrael shochen lishvatav. And that's when he says, Hein am levadad yishkon. Here is this nation that dwells alone, that dwells securely. And they're not yet in Eretz Dagan v'Tirosh, in a land of flowing with milk and honey. That will come later. But then he says, Utihi achriti kamohu. Let my end be with them. I'm throwing my lot in with them. And this is this one little sliver of the Messianic idea, where you just have one guy who sees what it could be. And then that vision gets picked up by Moshe in V'zot HaBracha. It says that one guy, that one nation, that could be everybody. Here's the blessing I'm giving you. There'll be belligerent nations that will make war against you. Those will be defeated. But there will be other nations. Moab wasn't able to do it. But at the end of days, there will be a time where other nations will see your example and will come join you in song. And when they do, that's the real end of the story. Have a good rest of the fast.